Welcome to the teacher orientation video for the British Balloon Museum and Library Key Stage 1 Up and Away resource pack. The history of hot air and gas ballooning is important and fascinating, but it's in fast danger of being lost. The British Balloon Museum and Library was formed in 1979 with the purpose of trying to preserve the many items associated with this popular activity. As a registered charity, it has saved dozens of historic balloons and built up a large collection of equipment, such as balloon burners, baskets, instruments, and a wide range of ballooning memorabilia. The British Balloon Museum and Library is keen for all ages to engage with the joys of ballooning, and so has created this Key Stage 1 Schools resource for your classroom. This video will give you an overview of the resource pack and its contents, as well as then exploring each of the 5 lessons in depth. The course takes a cross-curricular approach to exploring the topic of balloons, and so takes in national curriculum objectives for history, English, maths, geography, design and science. There are 5 lessons in the pack, each exploring a different aspect of balloons. Each lesson is designed to last 30 to 40 minutes long and contains a PowerPoint teaching deck, a lesson plan and a student worksheet. Additional ancillary materials support the course in the form of a topic classroom poster, student word mat and word cards, as well as an end of course quiz. Let's look at the 5 lessons in this curricular pack. The first, Things That Fly, is a historical exploration of flight, both man-made and natural, and it helps children put the subjects into a historical context. We'll go into more detail about this in a few moments. Lesson 2 is about the science of flight, looking at how various natural creatures and man-made objects, including balloons, fly. Lesson 3 focuses on the history of ballooning and explores this through its pioneers, from the Montgolfier brothers to Steve Fossett. The 4th lesson gets the children planning an imaginary balloon flight, using geographical and sequencing skills to read maps and create a flight plan. The 5th and final lesson takes art and design as its focus, showing how to make a beautiful and accurate model of a hot air balloon. Lesson 1, Things That Fly, sets the context for our learning and also prepares the ground for some of the vocabulary we'll be using. In all lessons, the principal focus of the curriculum for the lesson is also accompanied by a parallel focus on English vocabulary. This pivots around the use of the course word mat, which we'll look at in detail in a moment. National curriculum objectives addressed in this lesson are the development of an awareness of the past and the use of vocabulary to describe this, and to learn about significant events. The lesson objective given to the children is to learn about key developments in the history of human flight, but we'll also look at non-human flight too for context. Each lesson in this pack begins with a focus on vocabulary, finding key words that appear in the upcoming lesson on the course word mat. After this, the students are prompted to think about and to discuss key questions, which in this lesson are what is flying and what can fly. Using the picture cards supplied in this pack, the children are asked to collaborate in sorting the flying objects, first into categories of their own and then into the natural versus man-made category. This leads into the main input for this lesson, an animated timeline of flying. As you click through the slide, you'll see the chronological appearance of things that fly. First of all, natural, and then with the emergence of humans, man-made objects. You can make this slide as interactive or as discussion-based as you'd like to, and there are also things included on it that we don't go into in masses of detail in this resource pack, but you can use as a springboard for further discussion. The student's written task for this lesson is to complete and illustrate a simplified version of this timeline. There is also a high support version of the worksheet where the words are filled in, but the student has to read them and illustrate them. Each lesson in this pack ends in a plenary consisting of 3 questions. The first one in this lesson is, what is an aviator? A new piece of vocabulary that we addressed on our word mat. The second, what were some of the first creatures to fly on Earth? Relies on recall of the natural portion of the history of flight timeline. And the third question, what was the first man-made invention to fly? That is in fact kites. Lesson 2 looks at the physics of flying, but in a very simplified approach for younger students. The curricular focus, therefore, is science, but we still explore new English vocabulary. The national curriculum objectives are observing closely using simple equipment, performing simple tests, identifying and classifying, and using simple scientific language. And our objective for this lesson is to learn how a hot air balloon works. As usual, we start the lesson with a words warm-up, finding the vocabulary and definitions we'll need for this lesson on our word mat. A group discussion using the picture cards for support then asks the children to think about categorising things into how they fly. There will be many different categories, but the aim of this lesson is to explain what all of these methods of flight have in common. The first bit of science we need to explore focuses on 2 of our key words for this lesson, lift and gravity. The mass of planet Earth creates the powerful force of gravity, and you can discuss here what gravity is. It's the force that pulls us towards the ground. As illustrated here, that this is what makes things fall to the ground when you drop them. All things that fly need to overpower or overcome Earth's gravity force by creating something called lift, which is illustrated here in these blue upward arrows. We're going to have a look at how various flying things achieve lift. First of all, we're going to look at butterflies because that's something that very plausibly can fly because they are very light. But we're not going to start with a butterfly. We're going to start with air molecules. Now, although we can't see them, we know that the air is made up of tiny molecules. Here they are illustrated on the screen. By flapping its wings, the butterfly pushes air and air molecules around itself. This then results in more air molecules below the wings, which causes lift. Birds also flap their wings to push air molecules below their wings, which creates lift. But some birds have another way of achieving lift. They find naturally occurring warm air, which rises above cooler air. They use this to give them more lift. Now, onto our first man-made object. Planes don't flap their wings, so how do they create lift? Let's find out. So, aeroplanes use the high speed created by their engines to push air around their wings, again creating lift. However, they're much heavier than birds and butterflies, and so they have big wings and need fast speeds to create enough of that lift. Here's another way of achieving lift, used by balloons you might find when you go to a party. Helium is a gas that is lighter than the air that surrounds us. This makes it lift up or ascend or rise. If you fill a balloon with helium, it will ascend through the air. And now we come to hot air balloons and how they create lift. So we saw with the birds that heating air also makes it ascend or rise. If you fill a balloon with hot air, it will create enough lift to make it ascend off the ground, overcoming gravity. Now we move on to an experiment to demonstrate the effects of warm air rising and how this force can push up a paper spiral. The worksheet for this lesson gets students to make a prediction and record the experiment that they're going to observe. Again, there's a worksheet for students needing greater support. The worksheet for this experiment contains the cutouts and the instructions for making the paper spiral. However, not all classrooms will have access to an appropriate source of heat for all the students to take part in the experiment. Instead, the teacher can demonstrate the spiral being moved by rising warm air by holding it over a radiator or a lamp. The students then can perhaps take the spirals that they've made home and demonstrate the experiment to their families. As usual, we finish with a plenary and 3 questions. What force makes things fall to earth? Gravity. What force do flying things need to get off the ground? That's lift. And which rises, hot air or cold air? Well, we found out in our experiment that it is hot air, and that is what makes balloons go up. Lesson 3 takes a historical view of some of the pioneers of ballooning, so our curricular focus for this lesson is history. And the national curriculum objectives being explored here are to develop an awareness of the past using common words and phrases, to learn about events that are beyond living memory, which are significant nationally or globally, and also to learn about the lives of significant individuals who've contributed to national or international achievements. The learning objective delivered to the children is to learn about key pioneers in the field of ballooning. As usual, we start off with a words warm-up using our word mats. We then move on to a discussion to start off our thinking for this lesson, again using the picture cards to sort objects into things that are natural versus man-made, and also then to think about how the man-made things fly. The input for this lesson looks at pioneers in the field of ballooning, and of course we have to start off with the Montgolfier brothers. So in France, in 1783, these brothers were the first to successfully fly a hot air balloon, and they did this by burning a fire at the entrance of the balloon's envelope. Thankfully, the first passengers were a sheep, a duck and a rooster, so no humans were involved or put in any kind of danger. However, they did then send people up, and this flight went 9 kilometres and, thank goodness, landed safely. Not to be outdone by the men, there were also some very intrepid women balloon pioneers too, like Sophie Blanchard, who was genuinely a pioneer because she continued her husband's work at a time when women really didn't do this kind of thing. And she was famous for launching fireworks from her balloons basket. Britain also had its own female ballooning pioneer in Margaret Graham. She made the first British female solo balloon flight in 1826. And she also made nighttime balloon flights. Our fourth pioneer is Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin. He was an important person in the development of the airship, which, unlike hot air balloons, doesn't use hot air, but instead used hydrogen, a gas that is lighter than air, to make it rise. These airships were also known as dirigibles, which means could be steered. They had engines and they could direct themselves. This made them a lot more useful than hot air balloons because hot air balloons rely on the wind and the wind direction to steer them. Now we get into the 20th century and a person called Ed Yost. He was an American ballooning pioneer who showed us how using gas burners to heat the air was a lot safer than using fires, which seems pretty obvious now. He developed an onboard burner to keep the air in the balloon hot, so he managed to stay in the air for 1 hour and 35 minutes. And modern balloons all have onboard burners today. Our final pioneer is the American Steve Fossett, who was the first person to fly solo non-stop around the world, and his balloon used hot air but also helium to make it rise. This journey was over 33,000 kilometres and took 13 and a half days. The written exercise for this lesson is to fill in fact files with things the students can remember about these pioneers. It may be useful to do an initial class brainstorm or to go through the previous few slides again and write down key notes on the whiteboard. This brings us on to the plenary questions for this lesson. Which 3 animals first went up in the Montgolfier balloon? A sheep, a duck, and a rooster. What did Sophie Blanchard do whilst airborne in her balloon? She was the female pioneer who liked to launch fireworks. And what is Steve Fossett's great achievement? He was the first man to circumnavigate the globe solo in a balloon. In this fourth lesson, we're going to become balloonists ourselves and look at all the things we need to do to plan a hot air balloon trip. This means we'll be looking at maps and compass directions and thinking about weather conditions. So our curricular focus is geography. Our 2 national curriculum objectives here are working with sources of geographical information, including maps, and ensuring pupils can communicate geographical information in a variety of ways. And the learning objective given to the kids is to use geographical skills and knowledge to direct a virtual balloon flight. As usual, we start off with a words warm-up using our word maps. And then rather than a discussion to open up the lesson's learning, we're going to do a retrieval exercise. Questions will pop up and you can then click on the correct word to complete the sentence. So, for example, our first sentence is hot air balloons are made up of main parts, and the answer there is 3. So all the questions can come up, and then you can decide with your class which words best fit into those sentences. The children are given their worksheet early on in the lesson, as they'll need it to complete the 3 tasks they need to do during the course of the lesson. Here it is. Children can work in pairs or in groups. The first task is to check we have the weather we need for a successful flight. We need sun or at least very light clouds, and to make sure there's no danger of rain, mist or fog. We do need some wind though, as this is what makes the balloon travel. It can't be too heavy though, or else the balloon will be impossible to control. Let's check the weather forecast to see if we can fly our balloons today. Once we've made the decision, the students can record the weather conditions in the weather log box on their flight plan worksheets. The next few slides focus on reading the map on our sheets. First, we look at how to use the grid system of letters and numbers. And then we look at the scale of the map and also its key. Just to make sure we can read our maps, here are a few questions for the children to try. Find the grid number and a letter for the church. So let's find the symbol for the church, and we can see that's in E6. The wind farm is in B9. The village of Little Horton, well, I guess you could argue it's in E6 or E7. Bluebell Farm, again, it goes across lots of squares, so E1, E2, D2, and a little bit of D3 and E3 as well. And a car park. Well, we just need to find one, but we've got 3 we can choose from. One in A7, one in D4, and one in E3. Now on to our flight plan task number 2, to mark our takeoff point on our flight plans. We're told that our takeoff site is F4, so the children need to mark F4 with an X on their map. There we go, that's where we're taking off. In our third flight plan task, we think about where we're going to land our balloon and how we're going to land it safely. We have to avoid landing in built-up areas, woodland, farmland with animals, wind farms and water. It's good then to have a discussion about why we shouldn't land in any of these places. And then together we will find all of these areas on our map so we can make sure that we know not to land there. We saw on the weather report that the wind is coming from a south to southeasterly direction. This means it'll blow our balloon in this range of directions. This will be really important in working out where we can land our balloon. If you want to extend this learning, there are some great activities online explaining windsocks and how they're used to look at wind direction. So, now we know which direction the wind will blow us, let's discuss where we think would be a sensible place to land, giving the grid letter and number. Students can take some time to discuss this in their pairs or groups, and then together the class can talk about where they think would be a good spot on the map to aim for. Now we are all set to go. Congratulations, you have planned your virtual balloon trip. The next few slides encourage the children to imagine what they can see or experience as they go on their imaginary balloon flight on takeoff. The journey and landing. You could use this imaginary journey as a springboard for a drama exercise or perhaps even an art activity. So, as newly minted balloonists, what 3 things have we learnt today? What weather conditions are needed for a hot air balloon flight? So we need sun or any light clouds, and we need a light wind. What does a balloonist need to avoid in choosing a landing site? Well, we have things like built-up areas, farmland with animals, water. And what does a map scale show? It shows distance represented on the map. In lesson 5, we focus on art and design and make our own hot air balloon model. This activity needs to be carried out in stages, and adult assistance is required for the final assembly of the model. It could happily be split over 3 lessons, so first one papier-mâchéing, second painting, and the third lesson for assembling. This activity also works well when pairs or groups collaborate on one model. So we're looking at using a range of materials to design and make products, and also we're developing our design and art techniques using colour, pattern, texture, line, shape, form and space. The learning objective really is to follow instructions to create a papier-mâché hot air balloon from recycled materials. As this is our final lesson, we're going to try and remember some of the flight vocabulary we've learned without using our word mats. And then after that, we're straight into our activity. The worksheet and the slide deck contain step-by-step illustrated instructions for creating a papier-mâché balloon model. There is also a plenary to this lesson. Once the model balloons are made, reflecting on the materials we used, and specifically the material, the aluminium foil we used to make the model's burner, and then a little bit of personal reflection about what was the most fun bit of making the balloon. At the end of the course, there is a match-up quiz you can use with your students to see how well they've remembered the vocabulary from the last 5 lessons. And there's also a super challenge version of the quiz.